the issue that we see with general ed teachers in this day and age especially is they're generally overworked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't have enough support, in that if a kid with special needs is mainstreaming into their class, either fully included or participating in that class on some level, it's really important that the teacher have the support they need for that student.
Mm-hmm.
And so the teacher has to be sort of willing to say, like, I need help for this student with A, B, and C. I need to make sure that if they have a different curriculum, that their curriculum is ready. If they need, to be reminded on task, that there's additional help to do that, because a general ed teacher can't do that. They have a general ed size class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you teach a special ed class, you have less students and more help. And so a lot of times general ed teachers get kind of turned off to the idea of inclusion, but not because they have a issue against the kid, it's just they don't have support. So first of all, it's really important that they talk to their superiors, that they ask for support. And a lot of times they will be told by the school or the powers that be, like, don't tell the parent, right? There's a lot of that happens. Don't talk to the parent. Don't tell the parent what you need. Don't tell the parent their kid isn't being served. A lot of new teachers, especially, which I really appreciate, go around the process, and they actually do have conversations with parents off the record, right? So then parents have an understanding of what's going on. So when they go to an IEP, they can ask more pertinent questions, so the teacher isn't the one bringing it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's always how I like to operate. I don't want the teacher to be put on the firing line, but at the same time, if somebody's asked an honest question, 90% of the time they're going to give a pretty honest answer, right? But
Right.
it's not their fault,
Yeah.
because it's not like they're just volunteering information. So
Mm-hmm.
that's always really the baseline. They also need to understand, because this is a big one I get from teachers, and it's the one that drives me through the roof. On the report cards, I go back and read for my kids with executive function. The teacher comments in second, third, fourth grade are, if Billy would try a little harder, if Billy would pay a little more attention. Well, if you start seeing that Billy's not finishing his work, and you feel like Billy's not paying attention, and you even feel like Billy might be a class clown and doing it purposefully, that's the time you, as a responsible adult, need to take stock and say, what's going on with Billy? Might Billy be actually having a challenge that Billy is too afraid to tell me, or that Billy doesn't even recognize why he's not getting it, or what the problem is? So rather than just thinking Billy's being a defiant kid, when you see a kid who will not initiate tasks, who sits, who won't start, or once they get started, they stop a lot. Maybe they talk to their friend, because that gives them something to do, because they're not doing their work, but they're not doing it to be defiant. There is a disability at play. Maybe they don't finish their work. Mm-hmm. Maybe they finish their work, but they never turn it in, and it's stuffed in the bottom of their backpack. Or you have that kid that has a desk full of crumpled up papers in the back. Mm-hmm. Think executive function. Mm-hmm. That Those are classic signs of executive function dysfunction. And when I get a kid who's in sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth grade and only being diagnosed and supported then, and I go back and look at the report cards, you can see the trail all the way along. So if you have a kid like that, call a student study team, call attention to it. Better to investigate if Billy's having a struggle than to push Billy on to the next grade and think he'll catch up later, because Billy's not going to catch up later. It's only going to get worse. You know, when you see a kid who does a lot of tapping with their pencil or a lot of tapping with their foot, like, what's going on? Is it a sensory issue? Are they having a problem getting started? Is their body not regulated? Yeah, there might be kids who are just not on task, because that does happen. But when you see it a little bit more than what would be typical in your grade range, don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. Keep your eyes open, because especially if you're teaching in elementary, you are the first line of helping these kids so that they don't later end up pipelined to the prison. Because there's been a big study that happened many years ago by California Disability Rights that shows that kids who are undiagnosed, unsupported, learning disabilities, executive function, and they go through school and are pushed through school, 90% of them end up in jail. So keep your eyes open, keep your eye on the kid. I mean, to me, that's the number one important piece. And if you teach fourth grade and sixth grade, that's where shit really hits the fan. If a kid with executive function or some learning disabilities, reading disabilities, math calculation disabilities, a lot of times they can get through first, second, and third grade with a struggle, but they can get through it, because in those grades, you're more learning to read. There's a lot more support. Teachers are going over everything. But when you get to fourth grade, independence is a must. And so kids who could kind of move through even with a struggle, first, second, and third grade generally hits the fan in fourth grade, because that's when you start reading to learn rather than learning to read. And so you need your reading skills. And that's also a very important piece. In school, they do all those reading assessments. You know, they have all those lexiles and shit. Pay attention to the kids that are lower lexile, especially if you're in the first, second, and third grade. Get them intervention. Most every school has reading intervention programs that are not special ed. But those kids have got to get the fundamentals. They have to get the underpinnings of reading. They have to get decoding. They have to get phonics. They have to get fluency, or they will never get comprehension. And that's when you make the jump to fourth grade, where you're going to need to read to get the comprehension. So those are really important pieces for younger kids. And if you're in fourth, fifth, and sixth, and you notice, and by then, if Billy hasn't been identified and Billy has some issues, usually by fourth grade, Billy is a class clown or a defiant Billy, because Billy doesn't understand why he can't do what the rest of the people can do. And so he feels badly about himself. So he makes himself fit in by doing what he can do. So when you see that, don't just think it's Billy being bad. These are kids. They want to do well. They need help. So it's really important that no matter how overwhelmed these teachers are, that they keep their eye on these things, because there will be a lot of general ed students who are not identified, who are in their class, and they may be kids even with pretty good IQs, right? Who have learning disabilities, who have executive function, who have dyslexia, who have dysgraphia. If kids can't write, if they have a hard time writing, when they press really hard on the paper, and anytime you give them a piece of paper and pencil task, they have a fit, or they have to go to the nurse's room. Another big one, they get a stomach ache, they get a headache, or they need to go to the bathroom. That's escape behavior. Their anxiety is too high for them in what's being requested. Well, it might be too high because it's hard for them and they don't understand. Why is it hard for me? But all these other people, they're doing it just fine. Maybe that kid needs a tablet. And in this day and age, they have iPads and tablets and Chromebooks in every school. Teachers are very big on having kids learn to write. Okay, I get it. Kids need to learn to write, no problem. But when you see that struggle and you're trying to actually assess what a kid knows, as opposed to teaching him to write, let him give you his information in any way he can. Talk to him. Let him give it to you verbally, because then at least he's building confidence. And you say, oh, yeah, those are the right answers. Exactly. You understood what's going on. Great, right? Yeah. You want to know what he knows. You don't want him to struggle so hard to get thoughts out of his head onto a paper. The writing's hard, that he loses all cognition of what he's supposed to be thinking about or writing about or displaying knowledge. So there's so many pieces like that. And these kids that you're teaching, I mean, God bless them for wanting to go into education, right? It's not easy. Although everybody I know in public education, they call it the golden handcuffs, right? Because they get in and the benefits are really good. And they're really good if you retire there. So even though it's a hard job and maybe they're not making the most money, they have golden handcuffs because they're waiting for the day they retire and reap the benefits. So if they can hang in, that's really good, right? Those are the kinds of things that general ed teachers, especially in lower grades, really have to pay attention to. And then if they want to go on and they're teaching older grades and they have a kid that's a little bit more defiant, and their teacher from the year before said, watch out for this one, he throws pencils, watch out for this one, because they do talk. Mm-hmm. Go back and look at his scores, go back and look at his report cards, go back and see what his history was, so that you know who's actually showing up to your class, so that you might be the person to be the first one to say, well, he was having these struggles back in second grade. Now he's in sixth grade. What did we do to help him? Right? So that's always a really good tool. It's been a really good tool for me to go back. And because teachers on report cards, they're pretty honest, right? When they're writing notes to parents and on report cards, they're pretty honest about it. So they're not measuring their words. So you go back and look and they see, oh, this kid's had these same struggles, and look, he's never met the reading or math state standards, right? Well, then you kind of go ding, 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 like, well, what's going on for this kid? So if you get a kid older, you want to pay attention to that, because you don't know what went on before you. Mm-hmm. Then the other thing is, if they have kids with special needs in their class, they will become part of the IEP team at some point, right? Because there's a requirement for a general ed teacher to be there if the student is in general ed. So they're going to present to the IEP team, and what I tell every teacher and every administrator that I talk to, you have to remember, not only on your first day, but on your 20th year, that this process is secondhand to you. It becomes second nature. It- You'll speak in an IEP lingo, in a special ed lingo, in an educational lingo,
Mhm.
shortcuts.
Mhm.
Parents don't know that lingo. And parents are generally very intimidated because they think they should know it, so they don't want to come off looking stupid, right? So
Mhm.
I try to educate parents that if they don't understand a word or they don't understand something, just ask, right? Stop everything and ask. It's important that you understand, but it's also important that the school team try their best to remember if they're going to say monikers or numbers or BIP, that they stop and say behavior intervention program, so that the parent is on the same page, right? Because we're a team. And then the other thing is, when you go to the meetings, parents like to hear good things about their kids.
Mhm.
That it's very condescending for them to, the school team, to walk in and say, "We all love Billy. We love Billy. Billy is a great kid." Yeah, parents like to hear that, but they're not there to listen to what a great kid. We're happy you like Billy, but
Mhm.
let's really talk about, because that a lot of they go, oh, you love Billy. Okay, you're going to do the best for Billy.
Mhm.
Well, no, those two things do not go hand in hand. So you have to also be very professional in conveying your concerns, right? So they have these you know legal obligations for vocational goals, right? And they have this stupid computer program, and every vocational goal basically is, Billy's going to go on and identify 3 colleges or 3 professions that Billy's interested in, and then Billy's going to go on and determine what Billy needs to know to either enter that college or enter that profession.
Mhm.
Yeah, good luck. So when you're thinking about a kid, the number one thing you have to think about with those older kids is, how are they going to independently function in the world? What do they need to be able to independently function in the world, right?
Mhm.
And that's different for every kid based on their skill level. So you really have to think about that, and also be mindful of other organizations like Department of Rehabilitation. There are organizations out there that you can bring in. You can refer students to be a client, and they come up with you and help that student make that transition. So I would say, make sure you're very well aware of all the other organizations that are around that support kids in that
Mhm.
transitional time of their education, and access them, because parents don't know. Parents have
Right.
no idea what's out there, right? And listen to the kid, because kids have ideas, you know, and it goes beyond, do this computer program. So,
Mhm.
and depending on the severity of the kid, I mean, are they getting a high school diploma? Schools try to give every kid a high school diploma so they can be done with them, right?
Mhm.
Because kids with special ed, it's either until you get a high school diploma or the age of 22. So I have a kid in Carpinteria who's a 12th grader. He's reading at a first grade level. He's getting a diploma. You tell me how a kid who's reading at a first grade level could have made it through high school. Tell
Mhm.
me. I don't know.
Mhm.
but they want him to have a diploma. They want to be done with him. So you got to see, like, if it's really a kid who is on diploma track but just needs extra support, you want to teach them. They might want to go to junior college. They might want to go to a 4-year college. I have a lot of kids with IEPs that go to university, right?
Mhm.
How to access disability offices, how to understand what's available to support them in their next educational environment, because college on any level is very different than K through 12, right? That is true independence. And if you have a kid who's headed to college, you want to make sure they have those independent skills and those advocacy skills so they can go to their teacher and say, I'm stuck on this project and I know that I have extra time, but I've tried to do A, B, and C, and I'm still not there. Can I have a little extra time? And can you help me get there? Right? They
Mhm.
have to build that skill. So it's very important that teachers help them with independence and advocacy. Well, generally, if they're in general ed,
Mhm.
the first thing they would do is request a student study team meeting. And that would bring the parent in, that would bring usually the principal or vice principal and the teacher. And they may do some testing or they may not, but the teacher may say, hey, I noticed all these things about Billy, and I think we need to give Billy a little support. So in a student study team, they may recommend Billy for their reading intervention program where they pull Billy out for 20 minutes with the other group of kids who are in it, or somebody pushes in, whatever kind of reading intervention program they have.
Mhm.
Then, if that's still not enough and not working, then this is the hard part. The district has a legal obligation to child find. That does not mean sit on your ass and wait for somebody else to do it. That means go out and seek kids who may have a disability and refer them for assessment. General ed teachers may come up against opposition when they do this because schools hate doing assessments. School psychologists are generally lazy and they don't want to do assessments. They just say, oh, we'll do this, we'll do that. But they have a legal obligation. So the next thing the teacher should do is meet their obligation to child find and request a special education assessment. Now, they can talk to the parent, they can have a parent teacher conversation. And a lot of times, what teachers do is they'll ask the parent to ask for that,
Mhm.
which is fine, right?
Mhm.
Because the teacher sees it and the teacher already knows the players. So the teacher knows, this isn't going to go over so well. So if they say, like, to the parent, hey, these are things I see, and I don't know if but these things are available, kind of, then a parent can request it. But
Mhm.
the district has a legal obligation to do it. And then they would do a full special education assessment and they would see where Billy's strengths and weaknesses are, what Billy can do that's more in the range of typical, where Billy's struggling. And it gives the parents a much better idea, and the whole school, what this child, what they look like, what the whole picture is, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times, especially for teachers who teach in lower income houses, schools,
Mhm.
right? Where maybe both parents are working. and things are a little bit harder. A lot of times parents don't have the time at home to read with their kids. They don't have, a lot of them, they don't have enough nourishment. Sometimes that might be all it is to make sure in that house there's enough food. And so, because schools now have free food for people. So you might, it's delicate, right? But you got to find out these things, because maybe all Billy needs is to come to school and have a hot breakfast
Mhm.
and be prepared, ready to learn. And then maybe have a lunch for him. Sometimes there's no food at home. So that's a really big issue. And that's another important piece to look out for,
Mhm. Right, right. So I think, is it correct that if the parent puts in writing, I request an assessment, that it should happen within a certain
If
amount
the
of time?
parent puts in writing, and the parent should always put it in writing,
Mhm.
then what happens is the school has 15 days to either send an assessment plan for the parent to sign, which then starts from the day the parent signs and returns it. It starts a 60-day window where assessments must be completed and an IEP meeting held.
Okay.
That's 60 days, not counting days when school is not in session for 3 consecutive days. So, the long breaks, those don't count in the 60 days.
Okay.
But the school can also do a prior written notice and deny the assessment. And schools are stupid when they do that, because if there's any indication and a school won't assess and a parent gets their hands on a lawyer, 90% of the time, the parent's going to win that fight, because it's only about assessment. Oftentimes, I've had schools not assess, then the parent hires me, and then all of a sudden they're willing to assess because they know they really have to.
Mhm.
The other thing teachers do when they're trying to surreptitiously get help for the family, they often send them to Pause for Kids, which, believe it or not, is still in existence,
Mhm.
because I still run my free parent group the first Wednesday of every month. So they say, here's this group. They have this. Maybe you want to email them, find out, what they know. And then parents will often email, then it comes to me, and they may have a question and I answer their question, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot of that, especially in this area, because people know us here. The other thing that is important for kids, really in a general ed environment, is a lot of times they need help with the facilitation, like when we do group work. Sometimes typical kids might not want that kid in their group because they're afraid they're going to get graded down, right? Because if this person isn't doing that, or, those kinds of things, or they might be kind of afraid of depending on the nature of the needs. Anyway, so it's important that the kid with exceptional needs has something in their wheelhouse where they can really participate. And a lot of
Mhm.
times that might take some help from a special ed teacher, right? Because a general ed teacher may not understand all the pieces that maybe this kid would be better at doing.
Mhm.
So, what we call those people, there used to be actually inclusion specialists. but districts don't much have those anymore. And those are people who actually go in and help facilitate general ed environments for special ed kids. But like if you have a science project coming up and you know you're going to be in groups and there's different pieces, you might ask the special ed kids teacher, hey, if we're doing this project, what piece might Billy be really good at? So that Billy's really included, that there's always something Billy can do on some level. And so you want to try that as much as possible. And again, the teacher might need additional help because, it's a different flow. And for a kid to be included, they might need some help. They also
What do you see as far as, I guess, general ed instructional strategies as being helpful or hurtful for kids in special ed?
hands-on, manipulatives, projects, right? Not writing like you say in the workbook, oh, we read about this science thing that happens. Actually do the science thing, right? And I know sometimes it's harder, but drawing, keeping, like you say, the variety, not just a teacher and then write the answer, then this and then write the answer, but coming up with more experience-based learning is really helpful, I think, not only to special ed kids, but to general ed kids, because it teaches them a different way to think. When we grew up, it was all more about memorization, right? Like, okay, these are the rules, memorize those rules. This is your vocabulary, memorize that, blah, blah, blah. Well, in this day and age, they're actually trying to teach kids how to think analytically. And that was a big problem when they turned over to that new math, where it was more analytical than just the answers. But that's the way to teach a kid how to get through life, right? Not just spit out answers, but use your brain to think about it. And even if you don't get the right answer, let's go over your thought process, right? So experiments, hands-on, manipulatives, using all of those kinds of things are really helpful. Co-teaching bullshit. Co-teaching is a way for schools to pretend like they're doing inclusion. And what they do is they put a special ed teacher in a general ed class, and that special ed teacher is pushing in to support the kids with needs. Well, if you're a kid with needs, that you don't have too many needs, like, okay, you need some on-task reminders or maybe a graphic organizer, I don't know. The special ed teacher in a general ed class can't break the information down. The general ed teacher's teaching. So when you deliver, that's really in a mild to moderate special ed class, one of the biggest tools that a special ed teacher has is being able to go over the material on a slower pace and delve more into it rather than expecting the independence and the quick pace. Well, co-taught classes, you can't stop the pace. It's a general ed class. So in some cases, probably okay. In a lot of cases, it's just bullshit. Parents think it's full inclusion. Districts pretend like it's full inclusion, and the kids are in there struggling. I mean, I had a co-teacher at a couple of years ago tell me, I don't even do anything in there. I just go in there and I don't even do anything. She's very disgusted about what she was told the job would be and what it actually was. So it to me, I am not a believer in full inclusion for everyone. I do not believe in that. I do not believe that's the best placement for everyone.
Mhm.
I believe that inclusion is very beneficial for every student on some level. But some kids need that smaller environment. They need the material broken down. They need it reduced to the essential standards rather than the standards that are being taught and at the pace in a general ed class. So
Mhm.
it might make everyone feel better to stick a kid in that class, but the kid's not learning. So what are you going to do when the kid gets out and needs to get a job or move on? To me, it's a disservice. And I have only met one person in my life who was able to facilitate full inclusion of a severely autistic kid with success. And
Mhm.
it took a lot of work, but she did a brilliant job. And it was only through working with her that I realized what full inclusion is and what it takes.
Mhm.
So when people show up and tell me full inclusion, and I start asking about all the pieces that I know Kim did and their eyes glaze over, I'm like, okay, that's not full inclusion, right? Like you're sticking a kid in there and you're making parents feel good and, all that, but that kid's not learning. So forget about it.
Mhm.
So also, I think it's a way for schools to save money. So I think that there's some benefit to schools, but I, I don't I don't know how successful it is. You know what I'm saying? It is
Do
hard to do
well. Mhm.
unless it's only co-taught with kids who have minor disabilities,
Mhm.
right? With some disabilities, it it can work. But
Mhm.
in any disability where the pace needs to be slowed down and broken apart, if the general ed teacher is delivering the instruction, then even if the special ed teacher takes the special ed kids over to the corner to reteach them,
Mhm.
that's not full inclusion. And that's not co teaching. That's two separate programs going on in one classroom.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
that's, yeah, I'm more realist about that
Uh-huh.
stuff.
Okay.
Public schools never will retain a kid for anything, period, ever. They they will not. I
Mhm.
mean, they don't. So no. I mean, they won't because they just want to push them through. If you have a kid, the problem is if you have a kid who at the end of the year needs you need to be discussing grade retention, you failed him in the first 3 quarters of the year because he didn't just get there,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So student study teams, assessments, those are all the steps so you don't end up with a kid who needs to be retained.
Right.
A lot of parents want their kids retained. It's a fight that I have all the time.
Mhm.
Parents think, oh, we should be able to do this. Like, I want him to repeat this grade, or he's needs a little bit more. A big one is emotional maturity, right? Like he's
Mhm.
not quite emotionally, he's better with third graders and fourth graders. Well, that might be the case. And that might be an instance where it would be kind of okay, depending on the kid's academic level. But there, there's always ways to get a student where they should be with support. So even emotionally, maybe that kid needs some behavior help and some, you know, therapy. They have what school counseling.
Mhm.
Maybe they need a buddy to help them. Maybe they need some pragmatic skills. Maybe they don't get social cues. Maybe they're high functioning autism. Maybe they're Sheldon Cooper, right? That's
Mhm.
That's the example I give to everyone. Maybe they're Sheldon Cooper. They might be brilliant, but they're in second grade. They also might need to learn how to have conversations they don't want to have conversations about, how to talk about things that are not their preferred subject, how to actually be interested in other people. Sometimes we actually have to teach kids those things, right? They don't learn them incidentally. So that's another piece. If you see as a teacher, they need help. That's a big red flag, because if a kid without all those pragmatic social skills gets all the way through high school and gets in the real world, they're going to land in jail.
Mhm.
Right? And teachers walk a tight rope, because districts sometimes give illegal orders. You know, the assistant superintendent used to be in unified, and she was a middle school, like in charge of the middle school special eds or whatever.
Mhm.
She sent an email out to all of her staff and said, you may not offer summer school unless you clear it with me. Well, that's illegal, because any decision about a kid with an IEP needs to be made by an IEP team in an IEP meeting. And her whole
Mhm.
staff bolted, put big circles around her email, said illegal, and sent it to the newspaper, right?
Mhm.
So then hires her, and she's moved up the ranks. I mean, she
Mhm.
basically runs. Well, do you think that she's any less illegal minded? She doesn't put things in writing now, right? So a lot of times districts will ask teachers to do things that are not right.
Mhm.
And at some point, you're going to have that moral obligation, right?
Mhm.
What road do? I know this is the right thing, but I'm going to catch a lot of heat at work if I do it that way. And that's why a lot of teachers backdoor things,
Mhm.
because they don't want to be on those firing lines. They will be asked to do illegal things, and they will be asked to do illegal things with a smile and an attitude like it's not illegal,
Mhm.
but it will be. And it happens all the time. It amazes me how many people will lie under oath in a special education hearing for their employer. They are literally committing perjury, and perjure they prove the perjury with each other, because none of it coincides, but they're willing to get on that stand, raise their hand, take an oath, and lie. And don't become that person, right? That's what I can just say.
Mhm.
Don't become that person. It is not. It's not it's not what they went into education for. Anyone who's going into education is going in because they want to help kids, they want to teach kids, they want to make a difference, and it will be probably the most rewarding career. I speak from myself, because it's been 20 years that I have been dedicated to my practice of helping kids.
Mhm.
Carrie, it's the most rewarding work, but it's so difficult, because there is so much bullshit, that goes on.
Mhm.
And these are just little people who need to have every opportunity to have a future. So all of your bureaucratic red tape, that shouldn't matter, because this is what we're here for, is to give these kids a future. I was in a 5-hour IEP meeting Monday or Tuesday for a kid who's in high school. And when I got him, he was in a residential placement. He has a drug issue that started at high school, by the way. And so when I got him, he had come home. He lives with his grandmother. His grandmother is his guardian, because when he was born, his dad was a drug addict and in and out of jail, and his mother was a drug addict. So they signed the rights over to grandma, and grandma's raised this kid. So we knew he couldn't be unsupported in an unstructured environment. So I made a deal with the school district attorney, and we've placed him at, so he's there residentially and at school. So there's support while we figure this out. So we had this big 5-hour IEP meeting, and to determine if this kid actually needs a residential placement, right? So we have a kid in residential placement. We're trying to determine, does he need residential placement? The school psychologist from, in her whole report, just says, Billy wants to do drugs. Billy likes doing drugs. Billy doesn't buy into therapy. Billy doesn't take it seriously. Her whole attitude is, the problem with Billy is his drugs. And the problem with Billy isn't his drugs. The symptom of Billy is his drugs. The problem with Billy is that he suffered trauma very early on, and he has never been able to deal with it. And I had the team, who are therapists, and them, and none of them, when I asked point blank, were willing to say, yes, this kid needs residential placement. Even though they would say he needs a structured program, we don't know, we can't comment on it. And then finally, the therapist said to me, Kathy, I appreciate how much you're advocating for your kid, this kid. And I said to her, I am not advocating for this kid. This is not the Oprah show. We are not giving out, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. I am trying to save this kid's life. And you all need to go read this study about pipeline to the prisons. And if you really can't, as a therapist, make that recommendation, and you think sending him on the streets is fine, when he dies, it's on your conscience. And they all stopped. And everyone except for who did the assessment, who's probably going to burn in hell, I hope, they conceded. But they did not want to answer that question. I had to make them. Why? Are you there to help kids? Why? What are you afraid of to say? Why are you walking that line? Those are the things I never understand. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you doing there if you can't? And I'm the lawyer. Why do I know there's trauma? You read his records. You know there's trauma too. So those are the kinds of things that we come up against, and it's difficult. Don't be that person. Be an honest person, you know? And I know it's hard, but at the same time, they need to know that there are protections for employees who actually are honest and do the right thing. And if anything would ever happen to them, any kind of discipline, any kind of moving of schools or classes, if any negative thing happens to a employee because they have spoken out, there are legal protections. So, it's hard because nobody wants that, right? But if you're not, it's when the chips are down is when you really have to you can go along life and everything's fine and, off we go, row, row, row your boat. But when you hit that turbulent water, you really have to determine why did I go into this work? Why
Mhm.
am I? And if your answer is I'm here to help kids, then you got to figure out a way to do the right thing, period. Well, and if any of your students have any other questions or just have any interest in attending the monthly parent group that I do, they
Right.
are more than welcome. They will get a bevy of information in listening to parents.
Mhm.
That is really one of the most beautiful things, is to have parents talk to each other about their struggles, their successes. You know what I'm saying? So at
Right.
any time, if any of them want to, they are more than welcome.
And it's the first Wednesday?
The first Wednesday of every month. I'll put you on the Pause for Kids mailer so that
Oh,
you get,
good. Good.
yeah.
Good. Very good.